there were two things that we swapped out that I've already had conversation with someone about based on wearing it. And so should we explain what that is?
Sure.
So each season, we had planned to make dichototies, which for anyone that doesn't quite know what that is yet, let's explain it. So
Sure.
the dichototies are a set of t-shirts. Mike would be wearing one, I would be wearing the other. They use similar words, but the words on one are different than the placement of the words on the other so that they mean something completely different. So should we share what spring was?
Sure.
Because I think that's already out there. So spring is you are not your thoughts on one of them. And then the other one is all we are is thought. So we had some dichototies planned for the summer, and we got the screens made. And let me back up a little bit. So the way that the dichototies would work, our idea for that is that each one of us picked the phrase that resonated the most with us. And then we would be wearing them once a week. But they were also meant to be something that we could sell and something that people could hopefully engage with. It's some part of the point of wearing a uniform, if you will, each day is that clothing is a way to communicate with people. And especially if there's words on clothing, then people can read that. And if they have something to say directly to us, they can say that. If it just makes them maybe think about this concept, that's great. And then, at events, we were hoping that we could have them for sale and people could sort of debate which phrase makes the most sense to them and which one is relevant to whatever is going on in the world. So anyway, we had a set of dichototies planned for summer and we got the screens made. But I think the day that we were meant to print them was one of the first days of all the protests, the Black Lives Matter protests that come from the killing of George Floyd and the killing of many other people and everyone being super tired of police violence and needing that to change now. So we felt like the dichotomy was something that we could swap out and make more relevant to what's going on in terms of current events related to the social justice movement that's happening right now. And in a way to communicate about that while we're walking, and also in a way to hold ourselves accountable to continue to communicate about that throughout the year, even if the protests die down or the news stops covering it, or it's not just right in front of us all the time. It'll still keep us in conversation with it.
That's right. So basically the last 2 weeks before we started the walk, we took on a flurry of activity trying to figure out something that would be relevant for us to wear and also relevant for us to bring into this period of walking. So what we came up with for the summer was a series that will probably be just for this season, but I can't say definitively.
Yeah, we'll
It's
see.
called Unreported. And what Jesse and I did as part of our investigation into the NYPD budget, which you can see on our 4th episode of the podcast, I believe.
I think so.
You can check that out on YouTube and all the other ways. In addition to that, we started looking into police-related deaths in New York City for the past 10 years, from 2010 to 2019. And we were able to identify 103 deaths associated with the police during that time, doing as much research as we can. It's possible that there are others, but we tried our best. So we started with Wikipedia entries of all killings of the police in the country, and then narrowed down from there. And then after identifying all the New York killings there, we also went onto the NYPD's reporting of its own use of force reports. So firearms discharge reports and then use of force reports. And
in between that, actually, sorry, just to clarify, we also found a number of other sources that had listed out different years of these are all the people that were killed in this year by police. And it didn't all quite link up. You know, there were some names on one list, some different names on another list. So we just compiled everything that we could find.
Yes. So all in all, we identified 103. That list we generated into a map, which you can see on our clothing page. And you can see the concentration of areas in the city where these deaths occurred. In addition, if you click on any one of them, you have a listing of the person's name, the date, their age of death, and as well as a description of what occurred. We tried to be neutral in reporting exactly what occurred. And you can search based on that person's name to find out more information. However, there are about 12 cases there that are listed in the use of force reports by the police, but are not covered in any fashion in the news that we could find.
And in all of the reports from the use of force police, in all of the incident reports in that use of force report from the NYPD, none of them list the name.
No.
So we were able to find, based on, they all list the date and they all list just the incident report that's generated on their end. And I think they also all list the precinct number. Some of them go into actually saying what neighborhood or what street it was on, something like that. They don't all say that. But none of them say the name of the person that was killed. So all of these that we found that are unnamed were incidents that we found on that use of force report, but then, like you said, couldn't find any articles or anything on the internet about that with pretty significant time spent searching.
Yeah. So, I mean, part of this would be if people are able to identify these people for us while we're doing the project. That would be very interesting.
Yeah.
I will say that there were actually, and this sounds unbelievable, but there were actually 2 cases where not even the precinct is identified in the description. So the police reports identify a case where somebody was killed during the course of enforcing law, and you have no idea where this happened. Somebody died, and nobody picked up on it, and that's just that.
Yeah.
So for these shirts that we made, and I'm pulling it up now at the same time, so what we did was take 2 of those cases where there is no reporting going on whatsoever, and we made shirts that in some fashion or another memorialize and kind of put out into the world the fact that these things happened. And both for us to talk about it now and for us to talk about it when people inquire as to what exactly, is the story with the shirts. And so in addition to that, using all the killings that we found, not just the ones that are purely unidentified, we have paired a killing to a route so that we will pass nearby an area where something happened each week. And we don't know what form that will take in terms of documentation at this point, but we will be sharing in some capacity, either through the website, by sharing links and the story of what's going on, possibly some video, possibly communicating about it on the podcast. We're not really sure.
Yeah.
But as we said, we want to have this be in some fashion a part of what we're doing.
Yeah. And both to share it so that other people can be thinking about this and know the stories of these people that were killed, humanize them a bit, because right now they're, especially the unnamed people, are just linked as killed criminals, basically, and that's no way to go out. So we want to give some humanization to those people and then also learn more about the movement of, abolishing the police or abolishing prisons or reframing the criminal justice system to make it actually a justice system instead of what it is right now. I would love to learn more about that, and obviously I'm not an expert in that by any means, so we'll be talking about these things from the limited information that we have now and knowledge that we have now, and hopefully that will only grow. And I'm just going to put it out there right now too. We would love to have people on here that are more knowledgeable about anything that relates to this, really. Criminal justice reform, new social justice programs, what could be, what the budget that is meant to go to the police right now could go to instead, what it looks like to abolish prisons, any of this stuff. If there's people that are listening, or if you know somebody that is active in this type of work, we would love to have them on just to, learn more ourselves, share what they know with our community, and just try to engage so that hopefully this movement can continue to move forward.
Yeah, we're looking to incorporate what's going on into our lives and our project in a way that's durable and sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the way that's made sense to us so far.
Yeah.
And hopefully by bringing it into the consciousness in this way, it can forward things in a way that allows for, I think, getting this movement onto the tracks of clearly identifiable progress,
Mm-hmm.
and just something that is maintainable, But so the first week we intended to cover was the week that was on my shirt, because we went through the neighborhood where that incident occurred. And I will read the incident report now. Again, this is something that there is no news coverage of.
Mm-hmm.
So this occurred on June 29th, 2012, which actually will be, if all goes well with putting this podcast out, the day previous. That'll be this coming Monday.
Mm-hmm.
And so
7 or 8 years ago.
8 years ago, yes. Firearms discharge report, 2012. On June 29th at 1000 hours in the 83rd Precinct, and the 83rd Precinct is actually the Bushwick Precinct. It's located on Knickerbocker. It's an aside. A sergeant and a police officer conducting a routine patrol were approached by a victim who stated that a man with a firearm was trying to break into his house. The officers asked the man to get into their vehicle to let them know if he saw the man with the firearm. After canvassing the area with negative results, the officers took the man back to his home, where the attempted break-in had occurred, to complete their report. On the way back to the location, the victim spotted the subject and pointed him out to the officers. When the officers tried to approach the subject, he turned and brandished a silver revolver and pointed it in the direction of the officers while fleeing on foot. Hearing the officers' radio transmissions for help, 2 additional officers and a lieutenant responded to the area and began looking for the subject, who had carjacked a second victim. While approaching the vehicle, the lieutenant observed the subject again point the firearm at the officers and flee on foot. During the foot pursuit, an officer fired 1 round at the subject, striking him in the head and causing his demise. The subject had numerous prior arrests, including robbery and attempted murder. So that's the extent of this report on an unidentified death. And there are lots of things to unpack about that as far as I'm concerned. And I think the easiest one for me to think about is what I just described sounded like something out of a movie in terms of the level of action. Man tried to break into a house, a man carjacked somebody else, and then was shot in the head while being pursued by multiple police officers at 10 a.m. in the morning.
Yeah.
And somehow that was something that was not a news story.
Right.
That's so hard for me to believe. I understand I guess it's possible. You know, we went through the police blotters, which the New York Post keeps a police blotter on every day, and that was not identified at all as something that happened. But yeah, it's and we read through a number of stories that were similar that were covered on news, without any issue. So that makes me wonder exactly how that
slipped by.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was 2012. I guess what other news was happening that day could be a question that we would ask. Like, what else were people covering on June 29th, 2012?
Well, I think, ironically, there was a news story about a police officer getting some sort of honors awarded to him.
Oh, wow.
That was the only thing that I saw about that there.
Yeah.
And so that's the first thing, to have something so described, at least so remarkably, not have reporting on it.
Right.
The second thing being, if this is the only version of the story that exists, it starts to become very much, do I believe that this is what actually happened? Because that it's a type of thing that if you see something that's so built up, it almost makes you not want to go into it further. You don't, it's like, okay, well, especially that this is something that's common when you read these use of force reports, they almost always end with the subject's prior arrests and what it is, the implication being this was a bad person.
Right. Which, yeah. And I think it's interesting. I have had this feeling because I've read so many of them now that I read what happened. And in this case, this is really challenging because this guy was robbing someone with a gun. Presumably there was actually a gun. Then he ultimately was still in the neighborhood, stole someone's car with the same gun, and then it's really hard for me to think, especially in these times right now where there's so much communication about defund the police and we need the police and going back and forth. And the way I was brought up and what I was taught to believe is that the police will be as safe or the safe people, right? And they'll protect me from the bad people. And to be honest, my initial urge is to think, okay, well, maybe this time it was valid, what else were they to do? But I really have to check myself when I start to think that way, because then there's this criminal record, which, like you said, it's meant to make us think, oh, this was a bad person, this was a career criminal, as the Post might say. But this is a person that clearly had issues with crime and had already been in the system, and the system had failed them. They've been arrested, and there's been no rehabilitation for them. There have been multiple run-ins with police, and clearly the police aren't stopping crime. They're responding to it. They ultimately killed someone while he was in process of driving away someone's car in this incident. So I guess they got the car back for this person. But other than that, they really didn't stop any crime from happening. What they did was they killed someone that they had previously failed to rehabilitate, because that's not part of our criminal justice system right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'm trying to actively flip the way that I hear these things. I want to consider it from all sides because I think that that's the productive way to move forward. I would like to be able to have conversations with both the people that are further ahead on this thought process that I'm just kind of getting onto, but I'd also like to be able to have conversations with people that are still thinking in the way that I might have thought even just, I don't know, less than a year ago.
Yeah. So that's where we are with our thought process on identifying the killings that we're going to talk about or not. There's not really an intention to report all the ones that are clearly wrong or all the ones that are clearly right, or whatever that means. We want to be able to kind of have a diverse range of these situations in order to start having a conversation that fits solutions.
Right. Yeah, and I think trying to talk about this with less judgment on maybe what was done and more productive thinking on what could be done better moving forward.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, no one wants any of this to be happening. No one wants to be robbed at gunpoint. No one wants the police to be killing people. Or maybe there are people that want that, but they are definitely the far few in between. I think the majority of people want none of this to be happening. They want people that are having trouble to get help, and they don't want people to be shot by police.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the takeaway that we have from this one. My big thing is I would not like it that the only way killing is reported is through the lens of a law enforcement's form fill out.
Yes, and actually another big problem that I have with that form fill out is that it reports the criminal history of the person that's been killed. It doesn't report at all who the officer was, and it doesn't report at all the officer's history.
Right.
And we've found out in a lot of the cases that have made big news headlines, a number of times those officers have had a lot of complaints filed against them. But that's never in these use of force documents, which I think is really important.
Yeah.
If we're going to have a document that explains every time that a policeman or woman has fired their gun, we should know if it's the same person that's doing it over and over. Maybe that person needs to be reevaluated themselves.
Yeah. I think it's totally reasonable to be able to identify what the history of the officer was that was involved, or officers were that were involved.
Yeah. I
think that's a really compelling point.
Yeah. Right, because at this point, it's just very one-sided.
Yeah.
We think, and it's because not all of us, but a lot of us, especially those of us that have grown up with whatever form of privilege has allowed us to think that the police are the safe people to trust. We think that we can trust them, and we think that whatever is coming from that side is accurate. And I think it's time for everybody to start, realizing that we need all the information.
Yeah. And I would be interested to understand what the obligation the police has with respect to communicating to the press that things like this have happened, and what realistically that would do. Just kind of having a conversation about that they should recognize they have inherent biases. And it's not, I'm not even saying just the police have inherent biases, but anybody that's having to report a situation will have a perspective on it, and the public should have the right to have an external party investigate a death,
Right.
And, that some of the articles that we've read, unfortunately, the only article that you have is from a source like the Post, which uses language that is deliberately incendiary in order to paint criminals as, lifelong criminal thugs and just people that are hell-bent on contaminating society with their terribleness,
Right.
And at least there would be some version of that would be out in the world. We don't even have that version,
Yeah. Yeah. And that, I understand why people read that version because it plays into the idea of good and bad. It plays into, look at these terrible people. You can feel better about yourself. Maybe you did something terrible this morning, but then you find out that there's this lifelong career criminal and you're nowhere near that. So you can feel like you're on a higher stone than these other humans. But in reality, we're all humans and we all have the potential to do good or bad.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And, maybe this was dated wrong, which is not acceptable either. To have a document that was somehow was 3/29 instead of 6/29. I mean, I looked on either end. We both looked on either end of the date to see if there was anything on, and there wasn't. But a story like this, a place like the New York Post would be salivating to report on because it's so salacious. But it's not there, so this is all we have.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe we'll find, maybe there is another source that just doesn't show up in the SEO or whatever. Maybe there is a source that reports on this and we just don't know about it yet, but I hope that that's the case. I would like to learn more.
Yeah. So this is all we have for now. And then you can take a look at the shirt on our website. But the way that the one that I created was structured has the entirety of the borough of Brooklyn outlined, and then the date spray painted on in negative space with a rectangle, and then the date inside the rectangle, and then the precinct in which it occurred outlined within the borough and then striped to identify that this took place somewhere within this area. Because again, some of these police reports don't list the location, and this is one of those. It just has the precinct in general, which I would think is unacceptable as well. I don't know why that's information that can't be provided.
Right. Yeah.
Because that would allow people to research and find out what's going on.
Yeah.
Further.
Get a little bit more information about it.
Yeah. It assures that if the date is wrong, then the locations could potentially pop up in a search or something like that.
Yeah.
So that's that with respect to our shirts. We don't know what the fall is going to look like with respect to the shirts, but this is what we're doing now.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, a big part of what this project looked like from the beginning of when we started planning it was that we want to engage with everything that's important that's going on in the world. So we're going to be out walking every day. We want to be able to take things in, process them, talk about them, share that, take more in, process it, share it, whether it's about the same thing on a regular basis or whether we get more, new information. So far, 2020 has been a real wild ride. So who knows what the fall is going to look like? I don't even want to make a guess right now. But whatever seems to make the most sense and makes it seem like we're not only getting a physical exercise, but also intellectual, emotional, and justice-oriented exercise seems like what I'm looking for right now, and maybe what, seems like a good thing that I can share with the world.
Yeah.